Welcome to another episode of the Wize Way. I'm Brenton Ward, and with me I have Jamie Johns. How are you, Jamie?
Yeah, good, Brent. I'm going real well down here in Lawn, Victoria, Australia. Lovely
Yeah,
part
I've
of the
just
world, you know.
just received multiple videos from you rubbing in the sunshine, running down the beach, having a great time on a Friday afternoon. So, what
Singing
better
air supply,
place to be?
singing air supply.
Living the dream, most would say.
Yeah, it's something
Uh,
like that.
Jamie, another great week in the world of Wise. A lot of conversations with firm owners and exciting new territory for us this week where you coached the first business client of a client of your accounting firm. So we're now helping accounting firms coach their clients, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, it was a massive milestone. I think so cool to be able to help, you know, SMEs, as we call them, small to medium sized enterprises. And one of the comments was that one of the attendees had just finished doing an MBA. I think if you, and I think an MBA in Australia will cost you like 40 or 50K.
Yeah, big
And
dollar.
the person came out of it and said, well, I never learnt any of that at uni. So, it sort of makes you wonder what universities are actually teaching. And
Especially at the
it's just,
MBA level, because like you'd think, a degree is one thing, an MBA is a different league.
yeah, like masters of business. And for the person to say, oh, I never learnt any of that at uni,
It's
it's
fascinating.
sort of, yeah, well, it sort of fascinates me because, I've been in business for over 20 years and own or got ownership of multiple businesses, and the fact that that our universities aren't teaching some of these
And
other
with all
con.
respect to you, I mean, we're not talking about rocket science here. We're like simple fundamentals, basic
Mm.
principles.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's just interesting to know what academia is actually teaching in
Mm.
terms of and how that's relevant to the real world. So you know, it's funny when I say that because I reflect on Elon Musk, and some of these tycoons in business don't worry about a degree and don't worry about qualifications. And it's all true to an extent, and even Ed Chan, our co-founder, a lot of people always focus on, oh, you have to have, this qualification, but when you talk to Ed, he never mentions that first.
Mm. Well,
So
that's a great segue into what I want to talk to you about today, because the conversation I want to have is all around breeding and developing amazing client managers.
mm,
Because we can't build a firm that runs without us, without great client managers. Because without great client managers, we're stuck in the seat of client management. So you've just recently developed a resource and you've been talking about it quite a bit with clients. The three golden ways to better develop client managers. So I want to touch on those three ways today.
yeah,
But before we get into the tactical bits of it, what are the three ways? Why, where did this come from? What sparked you coming up with these three ways?
it always comes up. It starts with a problem, I think. Like I think if we can be service to people, it's always identifying what the roadblock is, why people are slaves to their firms or their business, and then identifying what the solution is. And at the end of the day, that's where you develop value. And so you've just got to work out, Brenton, what the solution is, that doesn't go around the problem, that goes through the problem. And there's a reason why around 4%, 5% of all businesses stay under the $1 million threshold,
Hmm.
because there's just that ceiling or that barrier that they can't get through. So the reason that we um, really wanted to hone in on this solution around the three factors of a great client manager is that I would say that 95% of firm owners get stuck at that sales division. So how Bren, we always talk about the seven divisions, and for anyone who's listening or watching doesn't know, the first division is board of management, then there's marketing, then there's sales, then there's production. Then you've got quality, admin, and accounts. So most people can be fairly successful, removing themselves up until division 4, which is production. But division 3 is sales. Sales, dealing with clients, that can be real tough to try and get yourself out of that division 3 role in sales, dealing with the clients. And so, it's the biggest problem is, so the more solutions that we've got to it, your ability as a firm owner to know how to see the potential in others so that then they can become a client manager and replace you, and then you can continue on that journey of withdrawal, continue on that journey of working on your firm and doing the tasks that you should be doing, because dealing with clients every day doesn't allow you to work on the business. Dealing with clients every day means that you work in the business.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the context. I always love talking about the org chart, Brenton, because it's like the helicopter view of your firm.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're in the weeds, you're not seeing the helicopter view.
Yeah.
So you've got to step back and say, hang on, where am I working in the firm? What are my goals? Or, am I stuck in division 3, which is sales? So you need to be able to develop or hire client managers with the right skills to get out of that division.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because there's a misconception that in order for someone to be a client manager, they have to be an amazing accountant, highly technical. They're basically like a superstar, right? They have to have all the
Mhm.
qualities, all the right DNA, and they're
Mm.
almost like unicorns to find.
Yeah,
Let's bust that myth a little bit.
that's the myth. Yeah.
And from your experience of both developing amazing client managers, I think you've got what, between 7 teams, you've probably got close to 14 now between senior and assistant client managers, and you've
That's
seen
right.
plenty more than that. So let's dissect a bit of the DNA, and if we can bottle it down into those 3 qualities that you want to point out in this conversation, let's go
Yeah.
there. But yeah, let's start with the
Yeah.
DNA.
Yeah. Well, the DNA, look, I think, if there's lots of books on this, it's 1,000 books, and you can see the boy bookshelf behind me. But, one of the absolute classics of this one is How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Dale
Um,
Carnegie.
Dale
Carnegie.
Carnegie. Yeah, yeah, Dale Carnegie. If you want to do a deep dive into this, there's another book called The Likability Factor. But Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. So the role of a client manager is to be you have to be a people person. You need to like people first and foremost.
Hmm.
So you need a certain level of interpersonal skills. You really do. If you go to work and you don't like working with people, and if you don't like taking phone calls, or correspondence with clients, then you really shouldn't be in that role. So that, you can't change the DNA. I've always known myself. I've just sort of essentially liked people. And, one of the quickest ways to get to like people is just to ask them questions, right? So, if you're a client manager or a budding client manager or aspirations to deal with clients, you're going to need to be a good listener.
Hmm.
I find the easiest way to break the barriers with strangers even, and build really quick rapport is to listen and just ask questions. So, which sort of leads me to those 3 factors, right? So, one of the first factors is to have empathy. You really need to have empathy with people, in the essence that, I hear you, I understand your concerns, I understand your problems. And really, as the old saying goes, is, get in those person's moccasins, get in
Hmm.
those person's shoes and understand their frame of reference. Not everyone can do that. You
Yeah.
can only do that when you really listen. And there's actually a lot of resources in the Wise Vault around leadership with senior client managers, particularly. I've seen senior client managers, Brenton, when they go into a meeting with someone and they're trying to address a problem, right? So there's a problem with a team member. But what you see is the senior client manager doing 80% of the talking. They almost talk over someone else. Now, the opposite is where the solution is. You let the team member do 80% of the talking, and it's better if you use tools too to draw out what their concern is.
Mhm.
Because if you're doing sort of, 80% of the talking, um, then you're not going to hear what the problem is. And also you're not going to create a non-blame culture. So you really got to do a study on what empathy actually means, and understanding another person's frame of reference. And even Dr. Stephen Covey's book, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. And correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's habit five. First, understand before being understood.
Seek to understand. Yeah.
Yeah, seek to understand before being understood. So the first critical factor is empathy for sure. Yeah,
So I
yeah.
just want to, with the looking at it with the lens of, we use a lot of sporting analogy, and there's a lot
Mm,
of crossover and parallels between business and sport. But in sport, the athlete or the player is going to practice every week, right? So they're either competing on whatever their race are or whatever their game is, but every
mm,
week, every day, they're going and practicing their craft. We
mm,
tend to forget that piece in business. We just
mm.
want to play the game and run the
Not
race,
practice.
but we get to
Yeah.
practice. So in that light, with that lens, how do you practice empathy? Like,
It's a
how do you
good
get
question.
better at empathy?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so what you have to do is you really have to be assertive about where your business is going and where your business is at. And the way to be assertive about, your business and your life is to have a plan. What's your plan? What's your goal? Well,
Mm,
so many people I talk to, Brent, they got no goals. They're just like sort of robots, and they're 9 to 5 and get in the car and the traffic, and and they do that for the rest of their life. So the problem is, as a firm owner, you need to have a plan, you need to have a goal, and part of that plan is to eventually have a client manager. So once you identify a client manager, you've got to take action and to execute the practice. In terms of your question, is bring the person into the meetings with you.
hmm
Like bring, and we call it double backing the meeting. So when you get a new lead, when you get a new referral, bring the client manager, bring the potential client manager in with you, and show them, train them what you do, how you use your hands, what your body language is, how you find out how you build rapport with people. I was recently in Perth with one of our mentors, and Thomas said to me, "Oh, it's fascinating." He said, Jamie, I watched you how you deal with people. And he said, I picked up so many little things. You ask lots of questions, you look them in the eye. It might sound basic, but the way that you practice in that sense, in the
Yeah.
analogy coming from sport in your business, is to identify the people in your firm who could be potential client managers, and then double back the meetings. And then what I love to do is after about 6 times, Brenton, I'll say the seventh time, to the up and coming client manager who's, whether they're a senior accountant or a senior bookkeeper, I'll say, okay, now it's your go.
Mm,
Right? And they look at me, oh, really? And then, then they have to chair the meeting. They have to follow the agenda. They have to deliver the proposal. And sure enough, you'll see those who can kick goals. You'll see those who shine,
yeah.
who's though have great attitude, and so that's how you do it. But see, a lot of accountants, they'll be worried about, their chargeable time. Or, it's going to cost me my time and the other person's time, right? But you have to invest in people. And like that old quote says, well, it does cost you to invest in people, but geez,
hmm
it costs you a lot more when you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just to drill on that a little bit more, your belief is, because there will be a lot of people listening to this going, I think I've got a good client manager in mind, but they're a bit blunt with clients. They probably don't have that empathetic DNA in them right now, but it is learnable, it is trainable, it is teachable.
Absolutely. Yeah, look, it's absolutely teachable, and it just comes down to someone's career path, their career audit, and what their attitude is.
Mm,
So if you've got a good attitude and that's their career path, and we talk about a thing called a career audit, which we can talk about another day, but provided they've got the right mindset and they've got a good attitude, after that double back of the meeting, one of the key things, everyone, is to have a debrief. So once you've had the meeting and you've seen the client, you should then take 5 or 10 minutes to debrief with the potential client manager and analyze it. So what did we do well? What did we do so well? Why didn't we build rapport? If it's a husband or wife in the meeting or partners, and you've got to practice modalities, because one person can be what we call a red client, the other one can be blue, or one can be left brain and right brain. So as a client manager, you got to know when to switch modalities. It's, switch gears, as we call it. So to round that off, that debrief is probably like the 80-20 rule. It's like the 80% of seeing the clients doing discussion, but the real value is in the 20% debrief after the meeting, because then you can say, look, you can give feedback to the potential person coming through. Look, you spoke too technically, you spoke over them. The
mm,
clients left and they didn't know what a concessional versus non-concessional super contribution is. If you talk really technical, you're just going to blow the clients off, because they won't have a clue what you're talking about. So you've got to bring yourself down to their level. And,
mm.
I always, when you're winning and kicking goals, when the client at the end of the interview leaves and they'll say to you, you're the first person I understand. You're the first accountant that I understand in a long time, what you explained. It makes sense. So,
That, and when they say, we'll see you next time, client manager, we don't need to see you anymore, Jamie.
yeah, pretty much. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
Right.
And yeah, if
So,
I can do it, the kid from the bush, anyone can do
yeah. So
it.
talk to us about that second quality out of the three. So we've got
Yeah,
empathy. What's the second?
authenticity.
Okay.
Yeah, so the second one is authenticity. It's just about being real, and particularly in our industry, which is full of compliance, full of technicalities, the law, taxation matters. It's important that you explain, when you do know things, but even more importantly, as a client manager, when you don't know things,
Mhm.
because it comes back to not trying to find superstars. A superstar accountant or bookkeeper is very hard to find. There's not many of them. When you do find them, they're very expensive. And lastly, they're hard to keep.
Mm.
Hard to keep superstars. So what you want to build is you don't want to build you don't want to build what we call a championship team. You want to build a team of champions. And so you want to build a team, what we call the Wize Ideal team, where one person's strengths supplement or compensate the other person's weaknesses. That's what teamwork's all about.
Yeah.
You'll never find any team, whether it's a hockey team, basketball, or football, where all the players are the same.
Or
You have
superstars. Yeah.
yeah, you have a tall person, you have a short person, you have a person who can kick long, you can have a person that can kick short but very accurate, and then you play them to position.
Mm.
That's what we need to do in our businesses.
Yeah.
And you know, and so in that sense, being authentic about what you're good at and what you're not good at, and when to bring, there's times when you need to bring a specialist in. It's like sort of almost like in the physician or the doctor, you have a general practitioner. Well, you need to know when to bring in the senior production manager, or the zero specialist, like the software specialist, or the super fund specialist. What a client manager has to be good at is that level of authenticity, and not trying to BS your way through the discussion, because
Mm.
clients read that. What clients are after is they're after good advice from yourself and the team in an authentic way. So you can't sort of try and, social media yourself and have this perspective that, you're one person there and another person there. The authenticity is very important because when you're authentic, obviously people connect with you. And often telling stories are a really good way to relate to people because they'll say, oh yeah, I had that happen to me,
Mhm.
and you can draw those parallels. And I always know, like, whenever I'm talking to you or anyone and say, oh, yeah, we went and did this and, this happened to me and our business went, you know, this direction or whatever, that just builds authenticity. Yeah. So,
And authenticity, correct me if I'm wrong, breeds or it encourages vulnerability, not
hmm,
just from the client manager, but also from the client. Because I often find even the client puts on a bit of a front because they don't
hmm,
want to look silly. I don't want to
hmm,
look silly in front of my account. I don't want to look like I don't know my business and things like that. So that authenticity cuts through that and allows for a genuine relationship. Also allows for problems to bubble to the surface that you can solve together quicker rather than
yeah,
finding out about them after the
yeah,
fact, maybe. Would that be right from your experience?
absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think part of that authenticity is, look, I don't know, but I'll find out. Or the other thing is, obviously, you've got, uh, client manager, client relationship is when mistakes do occur is knowing how to handle client mistakes.
Hmm.
So you can sort of develop a policy on that. But at a human level, research has found for the last 20 odd years that most clients or consumers expect mistakes, but the great majority of people, 80% of people, will stay with the firm based on how the problem is handled or how the problem is solved.
Hmm.
So that's all part of that being vulnerable, not trying to cover it up, not trying to shift the blame. And it's like,
Yeah.
yep, look, we dropped the ball. However, we're going to do X, Y, and Z to help you and fix this. Most people will appreciate that and stay with you. And that builds loyalty into the emotional bank account, as Dr. Covey says in Seven Habits. Building that emotional bank account is very important because with that emotional bank account and that authenticity, there will be times when you need to withdraw. And that's only normal in all human relationships.
So that's on the client side. Talk to me a little bit about the authenticity factor because a client manager is ultimately the leader of a team. So
Mm.
how does that authenticity factor come into being a great leader and managing the team?
Yeah, I think that rapport and trust is built with your weekly or monthly one-on-ones in terms of the client manager leading their team. So they really need to be a really well-knit, team. The client manager needs to understand the private lives, for example, of all the team members. What's going on because their private lives do affect work, and things in our life happen. They ebb and flow, good and bad. And if you can understand um, from an authentic level what's going on in their lives, you're better able to support them and manage them through the good times and the bad times.
Mhm.
So, and in a practical sense, Brendan, how is that developed? It's developed with one-on-one time, just like this, like just one-on-one time. And you need to like make time for that. You need to schedule for that. And we do a lot of work here. Um, with scheduling now one-on-one times, things like the career audit, the career wheel, energy audit. We really follow. There's a great book everyone can read. Everyone Deserves a Great Manager by Scott Miller. So, that's on the other side of around the team. You've got to develop really those foundations of trust in each of your team members, and
Mhm.
and you need to essentially be their hero. They need, remember that workshop we ran one time, Brenton, and I said everyone thought it was going to be a boring topic.
Yeah.
And I said to everyone, I said, can everyone here just nominate one person that they looked up to who gave them a go? Who's the one person in your career that you recall gave you a go, that had an influence on you and believed in you. And there wasn't one person probably out of 40 people who didn't put a name in the chat.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my question was then, are you the hero for your team? And
Yeah.
then I think you could have heard a pin drop.
It's a great conversation. Yeah.
Mm,
Because there's a bit of a look in the mirror moment there for a lot of us who are stuck in the weeds and
that's
could,
right.
have the ability to be that person, but we need
Mm,
to do the work to get there.
yeah.
So talk to me then about the third factor. So we've got empathy, we've got authenticity. What are we
Yeah.
rounding it out with?
Renting it out with enthusiasm.
Very
There is a way we can do it solutions focused. So a great client manager, a great way to be likable in general is to be enthusiastic. And I always remember reading years ago, and I think if you look at the deeper meaning enthusiasm, it actually means like the God within, the spirit within. In other words, make sure, you're a positive, solutions focused person.
Hmm.
That's, people like that. That's likable, but I think we've all had the case where we might, go to a dinner or a lunch with someone and we come away from that contact, we come away from that communication and we just like feel drained. It's like, oh, that was the drag.
Yeah.
Because someone might have, all they did was talk about other people and say how bad other people were, say how bad the world were, you know,
Complain. Yeah.
complain about everything, right? So the message there is be the opposite. We will find a way. Okay, we recognize it's difficult. We will find a way. We'll use this tool. We'll hire this person. We'll put a plan together. Enthusiasm in word, in deed, in your body language. And enthusiasm, it's such a powerful emotion and display of being positive that it's catchy. You know,
I'm going to put you on the spot for this
yeah,
because I'm almost certain it was you who told me about this because the story always
yeah.
comes into my head. But everyone's probably familiar with the storybook Winnie the Pooh, the
Oh, yeah,
illustrated book, and
yeah.
there's the story that goes, from this perspective around enthusiasm
Mm,
of are you showing up as Tigger, who's
yeah.
the tiger, or
Yeah,
as Eeyore, who's the
yeah,
donkey? So
that's right.
can you give me a glimpse into that?
Oh, it's just look. All it was years ago. There was a chap in America called Randy Poish, I think. I'm not sure how to pronounce
Oh
his name, but it's
yes, that's
actually
right. Yeah.
yeah, it's actually a bit of a sad story. Randy got pancreatic cancer, and he had this concept of what we call a last lecture.
Mm.
He actually, I've got the book actually. It's called The Last Lecture, if you want to look it up. And Randy Poish uh, did his last lecture, and one of his lecture, he did it at Carmel University, and then somehow Oprah Winfrey picked it up, and he ended up going on, national television on Oprah Winfrey. But part of his, I can't remember. It was, it was like 7 life lessons because obviously he had a very clear perspective of, the poor chap was dying and he did die. But he had, these life lessons. And one of the life lessons, he actually wrote the last lecture for his 2 or 3 kids. So it was very personal to him, but it really impacted everyone. And one of the wet lessons he said was, are you showing up every day as Tigger or Eeyore?
Yeah.
Right. And I remember, if anyone listening to this wants to Google Randy Porsche's last lecture with Oprah Winfrey,
I highly
it's one, I
encourage
think,
it. It's brilliant.
I think it's probably one of the most impactful videos,
Mm.
speeches that's, in 5 minutes I've ever watched. I think if we know we're going to die, then it really cuts through all the BS. And Randy Porsche's speech, he said, "Turn up every day as a Tigger." You know,
With
so
this, yeah,
Tigger
unbounding sense of enthusiasm. Yeah.
enthusiasm, we can do it. There is a way. There is a solution. So, I think a great characteristic of a client manager um, really is, has to be that level of enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Because, if you're dealing with clients every day and you're always saying, no, we can't do this, no, we can't do that,
Mm.
you're not, you're gonna be sort of withdrawing from the environment, from the vibe. You've got to be able to say, well, I think we can do this, and if we do X, Y, and Z, then we'll get that outcome. And that's enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is so catchy too. And
Is
you know,
is enthusiasm an input or an output, do you think, of personal behavior? Because when I think about it, and you mentioned the time and energy audit that we do with people, with team members, and that time and energy audit's made up of, what's your
Mm,
sleep like, what's your exercise like, what's your social life like, what's
mm,
your nutrition like right now.
yeah,
If those things are in balance and
mm.
scoring well, does that equate to enthusiasm, or is enthusiasm just a state of mind?
I think both. Yeah, I don't think most things are black and white in life, but I think, if you look at the energy audit about, sleep, connection, eat, those sort of things, obviously we can always maximize our mental and physical health. And, that starts by those things we just spoke about. At the same time, I think enthusiasm, um, I think it can be learned, um, because if you want to become someone you aren't and you want it bad enough, I do believe it can be learned. But the other thing is probably the third point is some people are just tend to be born like that.
Yeah.
They just tend to look on the bright side, like
Eternal optimists.
yeah, my oldest daughter is like it. My father-in-law was like it. Nothing would rattle them. Like nothing would that not problems don't really rattle them. So all personalities are different. Some personalities are very sort of level. My personality is more like, I'll be high for a long time and then I might have a dip and then back up. So, you know, but it's important that, particularly if you are a client manager, that, you leave, I think there's a new Friday tip, or a wise weekend tip that I recently wrote. And the title of the tip was, how do you leave people feeling?
Mm.
That's the whole tip. Like, that's the key. How do you leave people? I think that's the title of it. How do you leave people? And the sort of the explanation is, how do you feel leave? How do you leave people feeling after they've had contact with you?
Yeah.
And it's a really good question. It's a
It's a
really good
it's
question.
a beautiful question because,
Yeah.
yeah, energy is real, right? Like,
Mm,
uh, if you're having a bit of an off day, and your children are the biggest,
mm,
mirrors of your energy, I feel.
yeah.
But when you walk into a room, you're either feeding that room with energy or you're sucking it out.
Mm,
And being aware of that impact that you're having on other people, certainly
mm,
in a client situation as well,
yeah.
um, is
And
uh,
then,
is really important.
and this sort of to sort of sum it up too, Brenton, like I think on this particular topic, Socrates said, the unexamined life is not worth living. And so my point is, you really need to understand yourself.
Yeah, I was going to say
You
this. Self-awareness is such a huge thing in this, isn't it? Like,
yeah, you need to understand yourself. You need to understand your strengths. You need, like when I walk into a room full of people, it ignites me.
mm,
Like when I walk into a room of people with my personality, it's like, oh, I need to speak to every person.
yeah.
Someone else might walk in a room of people and think, oh, I just want to hide in the corner,
Hmm.
and
But
that's not a bad thing. It's just, it's just whatever comes natural to you. You can't change a leopard's spots. So,
yeah, so like if we want to slap a label on that, right, the society would tell us that one's an extrovert and one's an introvert. So the
mm,
extrovert walks into a room and, lights up at the thought of meeting 50 new people. The
yeah,
introvert would much rather stand by the coffee kiosk and, observe,
Yeah,
as the stigma or the stereotype goes. But in a profession where, if you looked at the statistic, it's probably largely made up of introverts.
more
Uh,
left brain people. Yeah.
yeah. So does
And there's
that
different
mean
degrees.
that, just to get your thoughts on that, does that mean that introverts or people who are more inclined to walk into that room and not really want to, meet every one of those 50 people?
Yeah,
Um,
well, and it's not all black and white because, we always talk about, society or in an academic sense, the term of extrovert and introvert is thrown around. But, Carl Jung, the famous psychologist who created it from his research, there's also what we call an ambivert,
yeah, and that's
and
what I wanted to,
they sit in the middle.
it's almost like a myth bust as well, because like I hate the labels, because then
Mm,
people box themselves in one or they get boxed in one.
mm.
Whereas an introvert can also be someone who walks into a room and loves talking to people and
Well, an ambivert or introvert, they can be really, really good in a one-to-one or one-to-two,
yeah,
client manager meeting
yeah,
scenario circumstance, right?
yeah,
And often, often people in general, and I've read a lot of books, of course, but one of the things is people in general love a calm salesperson.
mm,
People love to deal with people who are calm.
yeah,
And so, so whether you're an introvert or ambivert, some of those type of personalities do really, really well in that one-on-one situation with a client. Whereas, um, with a total extrovert, they mightn't do so well with one-on-one because they can't keep focused, but they might, when they walk into a room like myself, it's like, they might even perform better. So it's important that you don't sort of box people in labels
yeah.
because it's not all black and
Right.
white. You've got to look at
I agree.
different
I'm glad we touched on that, because I feel
circumstances.
like that stereotype
Yeah,
can box people in. They go, and then that turns into an I am not statement. Well, I'm not a client manager because I'm an introvert. I
yeah,
can't
that's
be a
right.
client manager.
Which
So
isn't,
it's
yeah,
not
that,
true at
which is
all.
which is not true. Yeah, so
So
no, that's
let's
right.
round out this conversation, Jamie. I think there's some really, really good points there that people listening in can kind of reflect on for themselves or take back to their team and start to have a conversation around it at least. So the three gold nuggets there are empathy, authenticity, and enthusiasm, with some really good sort of actions and takeaways and reflections there.
Mm.
How would you like to round this conversation out so anyone listening to this episode can take the next step, you know, take some
Mm.
action off this chat?
Yeah. Well, again, it comes back to where we started the discussion. I think if you're a firm owner, you need to identify which areas you're still working in the business. So I come back to that, our org chart,
Mm,
and the 7 divisions. So, if you've got aspirations to get your firm to work without you and you're still dealing with clients, that division 3, then today's discussion is really important because first of all, first step, almost go like through a checklist here, is identify the strengths and weaknesses of each of your staff members. I'd roll out things like the career audit, which is a fascinating tool, and we can have
it's
a
incredible. Yeah.
podcast on that as well. But and then once you've done that, I would study at depth what we call the Wize ideal team.
Hmm.
A bit like if you were a coach of a sports team, knowing, who's full forward and full back and center and ruck and all that sort of thing. But once you've studied that Wize ideal team, your role then as a leader is to play each person to their position. And you're going to play each person to their position based on their strengths and their weaknesses and what you'll get out of the career audit. Um, so that's really the third step there. And then really the fourth step then is really to discuss with each of your team members about what their career path is and which role they're going to play in the team and where their career path may lead them to. So even if they're a junior accountant or a junior bookkeeper, it doesn't mean they can't be a client manager one day.
Hmm.
So people leave if they don't have a career path. So in a practical sense, that it's design your teams, right? And in a bigger sense, each team can do about $1 million in fees. And once you've got your first million, then you can go to your next team. 10 years ago, I started with one team with $1 million, and now my firm, Sky Accounts, we're almost, we've got 7 teams almost at sort of $7 million. So you can't sit there and say that it's not possible, because it is possible. You just
Hmm.
need the knowledge. You need the knowledge, the know-how, the leadership, and it is possible. You've just got to be very clear on what your goals are, and then what's that last thing we say, Brent? Like you don't create success, you attract success to yourself by the person that you become. And
Hmm.
that's what I like the philosophy of wise mentoring, because if you want to grow your firm, it's going to have to start with you. It's going to have to start with private victory. Dr. Covey, he says private victory and then public victory.
Yeah, love it.
Mm.
Jamie, that's been a brilliant conversation. Thank you. I hope everyone listening in has taken something from that. And we'd love for you to share your comments or your feedback, or what's going on as a result of that conversation in your life or your firm. So do reach out to us, connect with us. And if we can help you in any other way, please do let us know. So, Jamie, see you on another episode. Thanks again. Have a good
Thanks,
weekend.
Brent. You too. See you, mate.